Today I'm at Shift Auto Works in Escondido, California, and my good friend Jerry is going to show us how to properly do a service on my wife's Jeep Wrangler's 2018 JL transmission. We're going to change the fluid, the filter, and the gasket. Let's get started.
My wife's Jeep Wrangler is a 2018 JL Rubicon with an 8-speed 850RE transmission. Depending on the year, make, and model of your Wrangler, the fluids, parts, and procedures of this service might be different, so be sure to reference your owner's manual before getting started. We are doing this fluid change in the shop on a lift to make it easier to document and share with you, but this is something you can easily do yourself in your garage on some tire ramps or some jack stands with some basic tools. Doing it here is just a little easier for me to get the right camera angle. Now my wife's Jeep is not stock anymore, and you can see here she has a full belly Artec skid plate system. If you have a stock Jeep Wrangler Rubicon or Gladiator, it will look more like this, and you will only have this cross member here that is attached with 3 bolts to remove. Very easy. While removing these skid plates is a little more involved, thankfully this is a service that is only required every 120,000 miles, depending on how you use your vehicle. Okay, now that the skid plate under the transmission is out of the way, it's time to start draining the oil. There are 13 bolts holding the transmission pan in place, and there is no drain plug for the fluid. So Jerry's going to start by removing the 3 bolts towards the rear of the Jeep, as this is where you want the majority of the fluid to drain from. Next, he slowly begins by slowly loosening the side bolts a few at a time until the transmission pan gasket breaks loose, and then a good amount of transmission fluid comes rushing out of the rear of the pan. Be sure to be ready to catch this fluid because it will come out quickly, and it'll be in a wide pattern once that gasket seal is broken. With the majority of the transmission fluid drained, it's now time to remove the remaining transmission pan bolts and then remove the pan. Although in our case, once all the bolts removed, the pan did not slide right out. So Jerry had to loosen the exhaust bolts on either side of the exhaust crossover pipe to allow for enough wiggle room to remove the pan. You don't want to force the pan and do any damage, so loosening up the exhaust will help it make it much easier. After the work to remove the pan was over, Jerry shared a little bit of knowledge about the transmission and the pan.
The JLs and JTs, the oil pan is made out of metal, not plastic. So the oil filter sticks to the pan. You bolt it to the pan. On the plastic oil pans, it's part of the pan. You gotta replace it. So this little tank right here gets oil pressure from the torque converter. And what it does, if you have a Jeep that has auto stop start and you're at a stoplight, that tank gets filled up with oil. And that oil is under a lot of pressure. So when the vehicle shuts off and then the light turns green, you let go of the brake pedal and the vehicle turns on again, the transmission uses that oil to start moving the vehicle. And then the torque converter starts to go. So yeah, it's pretty interesting how that works.
Pretty fascinating. I love learning new things about Jeep Wranglers. Next, Jerry removed the bolts holding the transmission filter to the transmission pan, then gave it a thorough inspection looking for large metal flakes, specifically focusing on the 2 magnets that are in the pan to catch metal. Thankfully, there were not any large metal flakes. Everything looked perfectly normal. Now, a trip over to the parts cleaner for a good cleaning. If you don't have a parts machine cleaner like this one, a few rags and some brake cleaner will get the job done in pretty quick order. Now I have also purchased a new transmission pan gasket, and Jerry said if the current one is in good condition, then it's perfectly acceptable to reuse it. So while returning the new one would have been a nice little refund, for the purpose of this install, we're going to go ahead and install it anyway. Next, time to put in the new transmission filter. This is a dealer part from Mopar, and we noticed a slight problem.
So, interesting little turn of events. We were going to put the new filter in and Jerry was inspecting it and it's cracked, it's broken, and that's just brand new straight from the dealership. So we have to run to the dealership and get a new one. Thankfully they have one, so we're gonna go swap this out. But good important thing to make sure you inspect your new parts before you put them in.
Thankfully, the dealership was still open and had the part in stock. So after a short drive and a good inspection of the filter, it's time to get it installed into the pan. One important thing to mention here is it should come with new nuts. These are what's called a torque oval lock nut, and they have an oval center that allows them to create friction with the bolt threads to keep them in place. These style nuts are not meant to be reused, so make sure you use the new ones. At this point, I thought we were pretty close to being done, but there is still several important steps that have to be done before this Jeep can be back on the road. The new transmission pan gasket has several little tabs that make it easy to line up with the pan and hold it into place as you're getting ready to install it. Now with the new filter and the gasket installed, one important thing to mention here is the orange O-ring on the filter needs to line up with this hole on the transmission. You should actually hear a pop when it is installed.
Find the sleeve.
Now with the pan in place, time to install the 13 bolts. Take your time here. You don't want to cross thread any of these, and you definitely don't want to tighten these down completely just yet. Make sure you get them all in place first. Once all 13 are in, you want to begin by tightening them down in a crisscross pattern around the transmission pan to make sure that the gasket seats evenly. The torque spec for these is only 8 foot-pounds, so be careful not to over-tighten. Next, Jerry took a few minutes to clean up all that transmission fluid that had leaked all over the place and tighten down the exhaust cross members that had to be loosened to give us that wiggle room to get that transmission pan out of there. And then a good inspection. And as we were sitting here inspecting this, we realized, this is a 2-door Jeep. Things are a little different here. On a Jeep Wrangler JL or a Gladiator, this is the fill plug for the transmission. And you can see it's very easy to access. On a 2-door Jeep Wrangler, because of the fuel tank and things are a little more condensed, it's hard to get to that plug, which is located right here. So Jerry had to get creative. On a 4-door Jeep Wrangler or a Gladiator, you would just slide an Allen wrench up there and no problems. It's not going to work for us. So Jerry took an Allen wrench and actually cut off the end and used it with a wrench that would fit tightly up under there, and this actually worked really well. Sometimes you got to make your own tools. This new tool slid easily up to get access to the plug, and then once you loosen it, you can easily take it out with your hands. Now that the plug is out though, we've got to figure out how to fill this. Now the challenge is getting the fluid into that hole, and because we're a 2-door and things are tight, it's not going to be easy. Thankfully, Jerry has a fluid pump that he can use. You can pick one of these up, a smaller version, cheaper, at an auto parts store to make it easy if you're working on a 2-door. Now Jeep recommends you use the Mopar 8 and 9 speed ATF for the transmission fluid change, and that's what we're using today. I bought 6 quarts and we used just a little over 5.5. And this stuff is not cheap. When you go have this service done at a dealership, they're going to charge you a pretty penny. If you do it yourself like we're doing here today, you're going to save quite a few bucks. Now it's time to begin filling up the transmission. There is no dipstick for the Jeep Wrangler JL transmission, so the only way you know when it's full is when the fluid starts coming out of the fill plug. But there's actually more to it than that. Once it finally begins to come out, you need to reinstall the fill plug and then put the vehicle on the ground, and you want to run it cycling through the gears. I believe Jerry did this a total of 4 times. Next, raise the Jeep back up and remove the plug. The fill level will most likely have dropped like it did in ours, and you will need to add a little more transmission fluid. So, now we're going to put the plug back in. Now, time to take the Jeep out for a test drive. During our drive, we heard a whining noise coming from under the transmission. Jerry said this is normal and it's typically air in the system and will go away within 1 to 2 minutes. However, ours did not. So we put it back on the lift, and this time Jerry kept it running and put it in park, and he kept the fill plug out and added just a little more fluid. During our next test drive, the whining noise was gone and the entire transmission service was now complete. Lastly, Jerry reinstalled the skid plates and made sure my wife's Jeep was ready to go for the next trail adventure. A huge thanks to Jerry for helping me out today and allowing me to follow him around with the camera. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.